All right. I think we got it. All right, you guys ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. So today we're going to do it's a lecture on addiction, but we're going to do what we call the treatment concepts. Like I was saying before, treatment concepts are, I guess, concepts that would explain basic human behavior. And I know everybody thinks they're an expert in human behavior, right? Because you're alive, right? Most of you have been alive for 30, 40 years, so you're thinking, I got this down, right? Most of the time, yeah, that's not true. It's mostly true, but it's not all the way true. Does that make sense? You can be really good at some things and not so good in other things. Does that make sense? So I'm not worried about the good things. Awesome, congratulations. I'm worried about the bad things. See, I get stuck with all the bad things. Everybody comes here for the bad things. So that's what I want to fix. I want to emphasize the good that you already have, and I want to mitigate the bad parts, okay? So we're going to discuss what these fundamental concepts are so that we can better understand and why we do this is to self-assess. Anybody know what self-assess is? That's a nice word, right? Self-assess. Pop psychology. What is it? What do you think it is, Chris?
To assess yourself.
But when I say self-assess, are you assessing yourself for a job or for the gym? Or when I say self-assess, what do you think I'm really meaning?
Well, take a real good hard look in the mirror at yourself.
Yeah, that's what, exactly right. Take a good long hard look at yourself in the mirror. You've heard that phrase before, right? They use it in movies and stuff. What that really means is to assess your level of stability. And we'll even add in mental stability. Now, when I talk about mental stability, what do you think I'm referring to? Do you interact in the world in one dimension? Just physically you're here? Or are there other dimensions to your existence?
Emotionally.
Emotional, absolutely. So you got physical, emotional, what else? Mental or cognitive, same thing. Yep. What else? Are you the only person here?
Socially.
Social, absolutely. What else? This is one a lot of people forget. Number 5, spiritually. Now, does that mean religion? It could, but does it have to? The answer is no. Spirituality means that you have a belief in something greater than yourself that inspires you, that gives you comfort, that gives you strength, that gives you motivation. It gives you hope. So spirituality, believe it or not, is very important. Now, could that be religion? Yeah, it could be meditation. It could be just being in touch with nature. It could be praying. It could be all kinds of things. But we're going to go over all these concepts. So you exist in 5 dimensions: physically, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, and socially. And like I said before, we base our mental or our functional stability based upon how well you are able to be independent and survive in life, correct? That's the ultimate goal, right? So it's independence and survival in life. Now, what does that mean? Where are the areas that we need? What do we need to be independent and stable? Stability will help us, but how do we become independent in life? What do you need to do?
Be self-sufficient.
Which is independent. It's just another way of saying it. So what do we need to be self-sufficient? You have to be physically capable, right? If I'm in a situation where I cannot physically do anything, will I be able to be self-sufficient? The answer is no. I'm going to need assistance in some form because I won't be able to interact in a way that will allow me independence. Okay? So physically, I have to be capable of getting to work every day. In order to work or to go to school or to develop some skill level that is either employable or able for you to be paid by, what do you need to work?
Mentally.
Mental or cognitive, absolutely, without question. Now, how do we develop cognition? Education, right? Experience, work experience, all kinds of things. So we can engage in life and learn by experience, or we can go and become educated formally. Is formal education a direct correlation with intelligence?
No.
Absolutely not. In fact, I laughingly say now, well, I don't want to get into all that stuff, but I'll just say, just because you have a formal degree doesn't mean you're intelligent. In fact, rarely is that the case. There are some people that are very smart that went on and got advanced degrees, and that coincides, but most people, believe it or not, are woefully ignorant or uneducated, and not generally too smart.
Yeah, they lack common sense.
They lack common sense. There's different types of intellect. And I'm more concerned with the most important one, and that is functional intellect. What do I mean by functional intellect? Your ability to thrive and prosper in life, to be able to be independent, to be able to make money in something that you're good at in order to become independent, to be able to problem solve and work and deal with the stresses and the conflicts of life, and to be able to overcome those, to be prosperous and to be functional and to be void of dysfunction. Does that make sense? Is there such a thing as normal? I hear this all the time. There's no such thing as normal, which is an excuse to be what? Dysfunctional or abnormal. Absolutely. So that's garbage. That's garbage. There is absolutely normal. What is normal? I've operationally defined it for the uses of psychology, and behavioral psychology in particular. I've operationally defined it as any behavior one engages in that does not create harm to themselves or others, intentionally or not. So any behavior you do engage in that causes you physical, emotional, spiritual, social, cognitive harm is abnormal. If all of your behaviors that you engage in don't cause dysfunction or harm in those areas to yourself or others, guess what? You're normal. Congratulations. Now, most people are relatively normal and most people are relatively functional. We already decided that. But there's usually one or two little areas that they have that aren't very functional. If I have 5 dimensions and one of those dimensions is faulty or broken, what will happen to the other dimensions? Will they get better?
No, they'll be affected.
Yeah, did you ever hear the phrase, you're only as strong as your weakest link? Well, that holds true in humans as well. Obviously, what happens, I'll give you an example. Let's say cognitively. How do you feel when you get a real bad cold? It's almost cold and flu season time. How do you feel? Are you more cognitively productive when you have a bad cold? How about physically? Do you feel like going out and working and exercising? No. So by virtue of having a physical illness, that's going to affect your cognitive, your emotional, so it can affect other areas of your life. Same holds true. The stronger you are in each area of your functioning, the less vulnerable you would become to stress, anxiety, and dysfunction. Correct? Okay. So, knowing that there's 5 dimensions and knowing that those dimensions can either be functional or dysfunctional, then we would want to take the course of action to better them, to make them better. How would you better your physical dimension? Is it possible, or are you just born with what you get?
No.
Well, how would you make your physical better?
Exercise.
Exercise, fantastic.
Eat better.
Nutrition, outstanding. What's the last one?
Sleep.
Yes, outstanding. Sleep. People don't realize how important sleep is. It's crucial for your well-being. It's and we have a whole 6-hour lecture on sleep, and how to efficiently sleep, and what causes problems, all that good stuff that we'll do another time. But for now, understand that it's one of the great resets for the mind and the body to repair itself and to fix itself emotionally and chemically is sleep, restful sleep, REM. So sleep. So let's say that a person exercised 3 times a week for 45 minutes, cut down on their, processed foods, fast foods, store-bought foods that are frozen, etc. And they ate relatively well, not super well, but relatively well. And they didn't ingest a lot of amphetamines like, what do they call them, pre-workout stuff, the Red Bulls and all that other stuff, the energy drinks and all that other stuff, and coffee, etc. And let's say that they had a regular sleep time and they didn't stay up late or watch television while they were asleep, and they ended up with restful sleep. What are the chances of them being physically stable?
Very.
Really high. It would be impossible not to, right? Is being physically fit affect your cognitive?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're more efficient physically. So better chemistry, right? Better blood circulation, less inflammation, less pain, less fatigue, more productivity in your job. How does it make your brain think? Boy, you got better chemistry. Chemistry meaning the dopamine and serotonin and GABA and norepinephrine and all the chemicals that stabilize your mental state of being. So if you're physically fit, your chemistry in your brain is more stable, meaning that you feel stable. You don't have depression. You're less likely to have anxiety. You're more likely to sleep better, et cetera, et cetera. Does it also affect your emotions? Well, yeah. How do you feel when you've been to the gym and you're exercising and you lose weight and you feel ideal? And how do you feel?
Like $1 million.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely, without question.
I
It gives you
exercise
self-esteem.
regularly, but I cannot sleep. Like last night, I probably slept an hour.
Well, we're going to work on the sleep, and I already can tell you, and this is just a side note, but you're correct in saying that exercise does not equate to good sleep. It doesn't. It will help, but nutrition is most important, and then anxiety and stress, the mind part, which is right, and that's exactly. I call it the washing machine. At nighttime, when you start to sit down. Right, and then that's fatigue, and that's different than sleeping restfully. Fatigue is also not good for you. Using external things like benzodiazepines, opiates, you can use tryptophan, you can use histamines, you can use all kinds of sleep aids that will knock you out. Those are different. That's inert. That doesn't have any effect on that stuff.
Except for the fruits and vegetables.
But you have to do it in a system of a sleep pattern. Just taking that stuff will help, but unless you implement it in the system that it was designed to work in, it will be less effective. But all things being said, when physical exertion and with the appropriate dimensions, all of them, not just physical, sleep, nutrition, and wellness is going to increase the likelihood that your self-esteem, your self-worth goes up dramatically because you feel better about yourself. And when you have more confidence and you have more energy and you physically feel better, are you going to perform better?
Yes.
Of course you are, without question. So again, that's one area, by the way. We have 4 others. And again, with the sleep, that's difficult. That's one that we talk about all the time. And unfortunately, what happens is we're really good at 2 or 3 dimensions, and we leave a couple of them out, and guess what happens? The others can't thrive because it thwarts it. You have to have all of. If I have an 8-cylinder car and it's driving on 6 cylinders, it'll still drive, not well, but it'll still drive. But I want it ideally to drive on all 8. then I can have the ideal performance that it's supposed to have. Does that make sense? Okay, so when we're talking about the dimensions, physical is the one that I talk about initially because it's easy. Everybody knows about nutrition. Here's what I find often. A lot of people think they're pretty healthy until we put the magnifying glass on. And what do we find out? Yeah, you're not nearly. Let me see what's going on with these lights here. Sorry about that, guys. Then we find out that it's not nearly as effective as we thought. That's a problem because perception has a lot to do with how we perceive things, obviously, which has everything to do with how we react and think about them and then how we behave, correct? So if we have...
We always say in business, perception is reality. Because
What's that?
We always say in business, like, perception is reality.
Right.
Because if the customer perceives it to be that way, whether it's right or wrong.
And that may work in sales, but not in mental health.
Yeah.
So good for you, but that's not, fake it till you make it. It's one of like those trainer guys that always walk around. I'm Mr. Positive, Jim Jupiter, healthiest guy in Tampa, and they're telling you how nothing affects them. Their family got killed in a tragedy. Oh no, that's a positive. It's all good. That's a bunch of garbage. That's a bunch of garbage. You always want to try to find the best light into things, and that's okay within reality. If I walk around telling everybody how beautiful I am and I'm 300 pounds overweight and so on, am I doing myself a service or a disservice?
Kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, it's going to be problematic in the long run. It may make me feel better to deny reality and distort my thinking, but it's not going to help me change. Do you understand? So, and it's going to give me excuses to not make change. So, and it's going to affect my self-esteem internally, even though I pretend it doesn't. I have to sleep at night, and I understand, and I know myself, and obviously anybody. So we want to be. Here's the great thing about the brain too, because then you say, well, I don't think we should have to worry about perfection. It's not about that. The brain doesn't care about perfection, believe it or not. It wants you to work towards your ideal. It is happy as long as you are in the process of working towards. It never really cares if you get to it. Does that make sense? If you're working towards getting to a goal and you're making some progress towards that, the brain is super happy and you will be very happy as long as you continue to make progress towards it. You may never reach the goal. Does that matter to the brain? Nope, absolutely not. Not for happiness. Working towards the goal is the ideal. Does that make sense? That's why most people, in order to find wellness in all these areas, need to find out that the process is way more important than the output. Does that make sense? Working towards and in the process of moving forward is what the brain wants. Everybody understand that? That's really important to understand. Because people say, oh, never gonna. You don't need to. You need to make the brain happy. And in order for the brain to be happy, it has to be working towards its ideal. When it does that, it will stop the anxiety, it will stop the stress response, and it will find a peace as long as you're working toward. When you stop working towards something and you know what you're doing is detrimental, you have cognitive dissonance, and that's going to cause a lot of anxiety and stress. And that's going to cause stagnation because it's going to prevent you from moving forward. And when you become stagnant and you don't move forward, how do you feel? Depressed, anxious, overwhelmed. And once you get to that, which doesn't take very long, well, then what are your actions or your behaviors? Escape. You escape. And you do that by overcompensating.
Yeah,
you emotionally eat, or you use distractions or altered state of mind, drugs, alcohol, etc., etc. And that's the problem, is most people aren't taught that failure is good and that it's something that you should embrace and learn to overcome in order to become better. They use it as an excuse to avoid or not do. Does that make sense? And if you avoid failure, you're going to have serious problems. Is it possible to avoid failure? No. In fact, I'll give you one better. Blow your mind a little bit here. Every single thing that you've ever learned that you're good at has been done because of failure. Every single thing since the time you were born has been an overcompensation or compensation of failure, no matter what. And people say, oh, how can that be? Listen, the greatest champions, let's say in fighting or in sports, do you think they were just born and they got on the playing field and stuff? What did they have to do for years and years? Fail. And what do they call it when you fail over and over and over again? Try to learn from that failure and become better from it.
Training.
It's called training or practice, literally. And is it possible for you to be a professional or really good at something unless you practice? No, it's not humanly possible. No matter what internal traits that you have or genetics that you have towards whatever propensity, you will not be successful unless you fail and fail and fail. It's necessary for success. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it's also necessary to be able to handle success. You know what happens to you when you give somebody a lot of money that's never learned to deal with money? What will they do?
Piss it away.
I don't know if I'd use piss it away, but yeah, certainly they would squander that money. Absolutely. But I'm not saying you're wrong. But we got to try to be PG somewhat here. But that's okay. You're welcome to your opinion. But she's correct. If you give somebody money that isn't used to a large amount of money, they will squander it, and it'll be detrimental to them. They had a show on, and again, I'm not going to go long on this point, but apparently like 90+% of all people that won the lotto, over millions of dollars, don't have it. Like 90% lose it within the first couple years. Holy crap.
I had a professor in college here at the University of Tampa who wrote a book called The Lottery on the first 10 people that won the New York State Lottery.
Yeah.
Not one of them
Had any money left over. What percentage of professional athletes keep their wealth 4 years after they leave the not many at all. And you're talking 50, 60 million to have all, and then that lifestyle. I mean, no offense to my boy Mike Tyson, but how do you blow through $100 million? That's stuff. They all do, because you make bad decisions, you surround yourself with bad people, and so on. So it's not necessarily because that person's incompetent, it's because they've made poor decisions based upon not having the knowledge and know-how and experience. So I always tell people say, whoa, money's happiness. Money's not happiness at all. Money can make you happy only if you were happy to begin with. Then it's going to make you more happy, because then you can utilize that money to better and to be more productive and to help other people, etc. What would happen if I went around and gave $1 million? Not that I'm going to do this, but let's say I can give $1 million to every indigent, alcoholic, or drug addict that I see on the road. What would happen to those people, right? Would I save their lives and they change their lives? Nope, we'd see a lot of ambulances coming by in the next couple weeks to pick up the dead bodies. Because if you give an addict an excessive amount of money, what are they going to do? They're going to buy drugs and do more than they can possibly take, and they're going to die. So that's not going to help. How's that happiness? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So there's a process to it. I hate to use those examples, but sometimes you need to press the point a little bit because there's a lot of misconceptions about happiness. Happiness is far different than pleasure, by the way. I've no doubt they'll meet their pleasure, but they're going to also meet with death most of the time. So again, the 5 dimensions are one of the bases of our concepts, because in order to find stability, step 1 is to stop doing what's causing the problem. When I say the problem, I mean dysfunction. And dysfunction is anything that's abnormal. And normal is anything that isn't harmful to yourself or others intentionally or not. Correct? All right. So if we've established that, how do we become stable? Well, we have to stop overindulging things. Behaviors, alcohol, or drugs. 2. Step 2. Go ahead. What were we going to say?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah. Step 2 is you have to take a look at the 5 dimensions in your life and find out which ones are faulty and which ones are your strong suit. There's always a couple strong suits. Okay? And here's what I find mostly, because this is the hardest step, because you're so used to living in this altered state of reality, delusion almost, that you think, do dysfunctional people know they're dysfunctional? No, usually not. That's a big wake-up call to them. Usually they figure it out when they have severe consequence or someone forces their precipice. Now, when that precipice of change occurs and they do realize there's dysfunction, it's very hard to beat these distortions in thinking. So stability is going to help that. Physical stability, first and foremost. That means to have a baseline, or what we're trying to build here is what we call a foundation. A foundation of all 5 dimensions is necessary for stability. Physically, I always start with that one because that's got the quickest change for the chemistry in the brain and to stop the things that are causing the problems, drugs, alcohol, and so on. That's part of the intake in your body or nutrition. Does that make sense? So you have to assess, what are you doing physically? Are you exercising a minimum of 3 times a week for 45 minutes? Show of hands. How many people do 3 times a week for 45 minutes of strenuous exercise that does not include walking or basic daily movements of activity? 2 people, myself included, 3. 3 out of, let's say, 10, which is about indicative of the average person. Average population is about 30%, and I'm only accounting for our area, about 30% of people exercise regularly. Some people go on little, hits here and there and so on and so forth. If exercise is so crucial to your functionality, your well-being and your health, why do only 30% do it? That's frightening, isn't it? What percentage of children are obese? 60 to 70%. That's appalling. What percentage of adults are overweight and or obese?
That work out all the time are overweight.
Well, that you mean not ideal. You're not overweight by BMI standards, but certainly everybody wants to be better. And when the older you get, and unfortunately that's not on your side. No offense to you or me or anybody else that's over 40 or on the wrong side of 40. It starts to go, and you're not going to be at your peak. Does that make sense? So age is going to be the great equalizer for everybody. But how you take care of yourself up until that time has everything to do with how you're going to glide to the end. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So a vast majority of people are not physically fit in the United States. I live outside of the country. In other countries, it's rare to see obese people. It's rare. I may go 2 weeks sometimes without seeing somebody who's obese. Here, I can't go 8 seconds.
So bad.
Listen,
So true.
and that just means when I look in the mirror, I just lost. So again, it's the U.S. and again, it has to do with culture and so on. And I'm not, but we have to take responsibility for it. So I'm not by no means. But tell me I'm lying, right?
No.
It's a shameful truth, one that we want to avoid. But the sooner we accept the reality of that, physical is crucial. And nutrition is crucial. Listen, I talk to people all the time. Your brain is like your engine, and it needs a certain type of fuel. Different cars need different types of fuel. Everybody understand that? Mm-hmm. There's diesel, there's low octane, high octane, and so on. If I give my truck diesel fuel, what's it going to do? Yeah, it's not gonna run very well for very long. And you're right, it's going to crap out on me. Okay, let's say I use crappy gas in it. It'll run unleaded, but will it run well? No. Is it going to get performance well? Is it going to be peak? No, absolutely not. What if I gave it the gas that was recommended and a high octane and so on? How's it going to run? It's going to run great. I'm going to get my ideal mileage out of it. It's going to run high performance. It's going to be great, and I will have little or no problems with it. If I run crappy fuel in it, it's going to end up breaking down. It's going to end up causing me lots and lots of consequences financially, obviously, and it's going to be out of commission often. People are no different. The fuel that you ingest has everything to do with your performance, especially your physical performance, your cognitive performance. So if you use bad fuel, it's going to run poorly. Does anybody disagree with that? Obviously, you know that, because everybody in here, has there been a week or two where you're just killing it? You made exercise, you're just eating right because of accident. I've been like that when I'm out of town and I'm in a different country. I eat good. Why? Because they don't have crap like we have here. And I'm like, wow, I lost 8-10 pounds and I feel all this energy and I don't feel, my inflammation. I feel like $1 million. Then I come back to the United States within 2 weeks, back again to misery. So again, everybody knows that feeling when you're doing the right thing. Now, it's hard to do the right thing. It takes sacrifice. It takes planning. And here's the problem. I find that one of the biggest setbacks to people, other than motivation, is organization. Do you know what the human mind needs more than anything in order to be successful at change?
Organization.
What's that?
Organize.
Repetition.
There you go. That's the beginning of it.
Like consistency.
Routine, structure, and consistency. Routine, structure, and consistency. If you want to find people that are really good at life, at what they do, at their job, at their profession, you will find a person rooted in routine, structure, and consistency. Guaranteed. Anything you don't do with consistency will fail. Plain and simple. You've learned that since a kid. So when we talk about what are the rudiments of getting started, stop doing what's causing the distortions in thought. If I'm high all the time, or I'm drunk and hungover off and on, am I going to be motivated for change? Am I going to be able to look at myself in the mirror and assess accurately? Absolutely not. Chemistry-wise, am I going to be physically able? Am I going to have the energy, the will, the knowledge to do? Absolutely not. I'm going to be lacking in all those areas, so it's going to stop me from even moving forward. Does that make sense? That's why I say you got to first stop, then you got to assess, then you have to create a routine and structure. Organization, sir, is what you were saying before, and that's absolutely essential. I tell everybody one of the best investments you can make isn't in the stock market or anything like that. It's with a planner. If you get yourself a daily planner where you have from 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, and then little month calendars in between, but every week and so on, and you start putting down a routine, and you start writing down all the bills that you have, and you write down all the important information, all the things that are every year, got to pay the tax, got to do this on it, and you start to organize that and start to list everything and put the things in there, I guarantee your life would get at least 40% better. At least 40% better. That's no exaggeration. That's an underestimate. 40% better. Can you make it through college without a planner?
No.
Maybe if you're in the liberal arts and you're studying, some liberal class, but not in reality, not in engineering, not in medicine, not in nursing, not in all that other stuff that are teaching and all that other. You absolutely must be organized in order to be able to do. What about business? Are you going to have a successful business if you're not organized? Absolutely not. I see guys all the time. The biggest failure in these startup landscaping companies, construction companies, tree services, all kinds of stuff. Great businesses to have. They just wing it. They try to remember their appointments. They try to remember what they said. They try to remember this and stuff and organize it. And they fail miserably because it's not possible. It's not possible. The average brain can remember 5 to 7 things. If you're running a business, you have hundreds. And you're not going to be organized. And they fly by night. They're just going, make enough. And then they go and they're just getting by. They'll fail because it's not sustainable. Does that make sense? The guys, however, that do get organized, that do structure stuff, that do get routines, start to create these patterns of behavior and start to mold those and build on those, become unbelievably successful. Same with school. Remember when I first started, that was a mess. I missed classes, show up late, I'd forget assignments. Not that I wanted to. I thought I had it down and I'll get to it, I'll remember it when I leave, and then I'm out doing You got to have routine, structure, and consistency, and organization will come with that. Once you have that, you have the fundamentals. It's only two things. Stop doing the things that are causing the distortions. 2, create organization through structure, routine, and consistency. And then all you got to do is move forward. Wake up. Just do it every day. Anybody here ever start going to exercise a little bit? You make it the first 3 days, right? You try to go hard at it. What happens on that 3rd or 4th day when your muscles say, screw you? You feel like shit, right? Can't move, you're sore. What do? You're like, I'm out of here. This is horrible. Now, had you organized and you said, listen, 3 days a week, I'm going to start slow. I'm going to build up. These are the days. This is the time. During this, I'm going to do this and that and so on. What are your chances of sticking with it for longer than 2 weeks? Excellent. 60%. Most of the gym trainers that I know say when they create a list and organize it for that person by giving them a schedule and what to do and how to do and do it all, write it all out for them, the chances of them sticking with it are 60 to 70% better than them just making appointments with random people because they never show up or they back out at the last minute, etc. Now, after 2 weeks of routinely working out, something changes in your mind. Anybody know what that is? That's about the approximate time it takes to get a routine.
Like a habit.
A habit. Mm-hmm. So habit formation takes approximately 10 days to 14 days to start, maybe a little bit more depending on what. But after 14 days, 3 times a week, guess what happens? The brain is like, hey, this is automatic now. Now it starts to look forward to it because it doesn't look at it as a task that's temporary. It looks at it as a routine it has to do to get somewhere else. Does that make sense? And when that starts to become routine and consistent, after about 3 weeks, you'll actually start to feel benefits. You'll start to feel weight loss and you'll start to feel better and more energy and feel better. You look in the mirror and you're like, hey, all right, how you doing? And then next thing you know, you're more motivated to go do that. Do you see how the ball starts rolling? Downhill at that point. It's getting to that first 3 weeks of routine change in order for change to occur. And that's structure and routine and consistency. There's no way around that. Motivation will not help you. Routine, structure, and discipline will until you get to that point. That's when motivation kicks in because the physiology changes and your mindset changes. Does that make sense? Same with diet and so on. How are you going to change your diet if you're not organized, if you don't write it down, if you don't have a set schedule of what you're going to get, how you're going to get it, when you're going to eat, and so on? Now, do you have to stay like that? No, of course not. Once it becomes routine and you start to get healthy, your body knows what to eat. You can change things up. You can do that. Why? Because you're in a routine. You're inconsistent or you're in a consistent pattern. And what happens if you start to go sideways? Go right back to the basics again. And then it keeps you from falling out. When you don't, you're doing all right for a while. And then what happens? You have one bad emotional day. And what happens? The pizza gets ordered. Next thing you know, bam, it's Game of Thrones night. Pizza and soda and all that other crap.
That was me last night.
I was waiting for somebody to say that. But that's what happens. Now, again, that's human nature and that's okay. The problem is it becomes problematic because if you do that and you don't get past that routine, then you're going to do that. And then you fail several times and guess what? You stop doing? Trying.
Yeah, give up.
After a while, you're like, yeah, I'm just not going to do it anymore because you get overwhelmed by it. What's the use? I tried 10 times. right?
It all in your head.
And then you blame it on the other thing. Oh, it's the gym, it's my trainer, it's this and that. Because the cognitive dissonance doesn't like shame and guilt. It doesn't like responsibility. Had you developed those developmental milestones in childhood, we wouldn't be sitting here. We wouldn't be discussing it. So that impulse control has to be quelled. It has to be changed. And the only way to do that, routine, structure, and consistency. Even the things I've hated most in life, after a while, just drudging through it, after a while, start to get good. After a while, it start to next thing you know, you're like, man, this is pretty good. Had you caught me at around 3 or 4 and tried to make me brush my teeth, there'd be a fight, I guarantee you, or put on clothes or shoes. After a while, you realize just through consistency that it's automatic. I never think about it now. And again, everybody here has done things that they dislike. I always tell people about their new job, or when you start a new job, it's miserable. You hate it. Why? Because it's chaotic. You don't know what's happening. You're not in any routine. What happens after several weeks? You're in a routine. You start to feel comfortable. Routine allows you to become competent. It knows what to do in order to be successful because you're doing the same thing over and over. You know what to expect. So you can lower stress, increase your productivity, and next thing you know, you become more successful and more confident. Next thing you know, you love the job. What's changed? Nothing other than familiarity, routine, structure, and consistency, which allows you to be successful. And once you have that, you'll start to go more and more and more. But if you don't have the energy or the cognitive capacity or the mental capacity emotionally, what are you going to do? Fail. Because you can't even get started. So that's why when I say that there's a foundation, and these foundations are made up of these treatment concepts, that's why it's so crucial. So the physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, and social are crucial because in each one of those areas can be strengthened. How would you strengthen emotional? Is that possible? Let's say I was withdrawn and isolated and I never cry and I don't interact with people because I don't like them and so on. Am I going to be healthy? No. Why? Where's all my energy and all my frustration and all that stuff going to go? It's going to get nice and bottled up. What do you think that turns into? Happiness and unicorn poop? How does it come out? Yeah, it comes out in frustration, and that internalized frustration starts to become anger, and then boom, you pop, and what happens? Oh my goodness, self-destructive behavior, screaming, yelling, you're irritated all the time, and so on. Is that going to help you sleep? No. Is that going to help you with your other? Absolutely. Do you see where I'm going with that? So you got to understand one's going to lead to the other. So emotional outlets are crucial. 3 things to do in order to increase your emotional wellness. 1, laugh. Laugh is the great reset. If anybody here has had a group of girlfriends or boyfriends or a mix of friends where you just had a belly laugh, guys do it all the time. And they do it by cutting up on each other, making fun of each other and ripping on you. Say, well, that's not good. They know they're kidding. It's in a good thing. And a lot of you guys are laughing and smiling about it because you've sat around a campfire before just ripping on people or at a sports game and so on. And what happens, once people start to get the giggles and laugh, you start to get that big belly laugh. You're crying from laughing so hard. And how do you feel hours and a day later? Like $1 million, like somebody reset you. Same thing with being sad. What happens when you cry and let it all out? How do you feel? Probably not good when you're crying, but afterwards, relief. The chemistry resets itself. Crying and laughing literally reset the neurochemistry in the brain. And I'm not talking about a giggle, I'm talking about a good belly laugh and about a good cry. That literally will reset the neurochemistry in your brain back to default settings. Sleep does that too, and so does very strenuous exercise. So all of these things that we talk about in terms of each dimension, each one of them has a reset for your physical well-being through chemistry. And if you're ignoring those, you're going to cause poor chemistry in your body. Does that make sense? And that's going to lead to all kinds of not good or bad problems. Okay? So that being said, laugh, cry, and have an emotional support system. What does that mean? Do we need to go have a group and look in the mirror and hug stuffed animals? No, come on. Have a couple friends that are affirming, okay? When you go to your friend and say, hey man, I said, oh, you're an idiot. Oh, that's not a good one. You want someone that's affirming to you, someone that's on your side, someone that can empathize with you. It could be a work person, it could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be a significant other. But have someone that you trust enough to discuss and vent with to a certain degree. Does that make sense? So being able to talk and express yourself and be listened to seriously is very important, to be affirmed. And yeah, that's too bad. Even if it's just empathy, it's very important to interact with other human beings in a social context. It's necessary for wellness. Even though we may not like it all the time, it's necessary. Trust me, I find myself fighting. I'll let you in on a secret. I don't care much for people. In fact, I don't like them very much at all. Even though I do the opposite for a living, I dislike people quite a bit. So it takes a great effort for me to socialize and to interact with people. But I learned that a long time ago. I need to. So I will force myself to. And when I do it, I quite enjoy it. So I have to remind myself of the wellness part of that. And that means interacting with healthy family or non-toxic people in good social interactions. Does that make sense? And that's the way you get that support. And again, how hard is it to find a way to cry? Ladies, you probably got this down. Not that that's a bad thing. I wish guys would have it more down. I didn't mean that derogatorily. Well, how do guys do it? Listen, rent Armageddon or rent The Natural or something. Find a good movie that just gets you. And I guarantee every time I watch Armageddon, do you guys know what I'm talking about? Armageddon, the movie, where the daughter's saying goodbye to her dad. Bye, Daddy, and stuff like that. I don't know why I always find it. I'm like, wow, that's a grip. I've seen it a million times. I'm like, man, it got me again. I wasn't even paying attention. So that kind of stuff you can find. You know which ones get you. You don't have to be in front of a bunch of people and say, here, videotape me. I'm going to do this on Instagram. Just sit at your own leisure, relax, get in the mood for it, watch it and just let it out a little bit. Trust me, the brain loves it. And get yourself a good one in there. You don't have to tell nobody if it's that important to you. Okay? But it's crucial to let that out. You have to unclog the system. Same with the laughing. You say, well, I don't have that many friends. I don't have funny friends. My friends are all dumb. Well, go rent a video. They have a whole comedy channel. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. If you go on iHeartRadio and type in comedy, they have all these really cool stand-ups and stuff like that. You can watch them all over the place. Some of it's really funny. I notice that late at night, sometimes I'll listen to that after a not so great day, and I just have some pretty good laughs. Not all of them, but some of them just crack me up. I'm like, holy shit. And I'll get a good laugh in before bedtime, and I wake up feeling great. Why? Because I let a little bit out. You don't have to do it all the time, but set aside some time to do that. A little alone time, a little one-on-one time. Does that make sense? Women have a tendency to be more in touch with their feelings, so they're better at it than men. But still, it has to be consistent and it has to be controlled. Does that make sense? Hysteria is not helpful. Letting a little crying and letting emotional out and so on is good. Hysteria, bad. So there has to be moderation in everything, right? You don't go around looking for a fight with your spouse so that you can scream and yell. That's not what I'm talking. That's not a healthy, productive way of doing that. But in the context of emotional release and so on amongst friends in a good setting, that's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Well, I beat my boyfriend up last week, so I feel much better. No, that's not healthy at all. Do you see what I'm saying? You got to be controlled, and it has to be productive. All right. What about cognitive? That's an easy one. Study, learn, educate. You can do crossword puzzles. You can do mathematics. The brain doesn't take much to learn. As long as you are productive in any activity where the brain is using strategy or problem solving in order to engage. But how many people like to go back and engage in school after they graduated? Zero.
Nobody.
A lot of folks here probably haven't cracked a book or or looked or read anything because they're like, screw that, I did enough with that. But listen, you have to participate in order to keep your brain moving. I'm telling you, otherwise, if that becomes stagnant, you're going to be more likely for Alzheimer's or dementia or cognitive delays or later on in life. It's the old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's very true, especially with people. So you have to make some effort to educate or continue the growth of the cognition, and that's usually through studying or reading or problem solving. Okay, is video games good for your brain? No, it'll turn it to mush. Actually, studies have been done, and you lower your IQ. I'm exaggerating that slightly, but it does cause cognitive impairment. I say it makes you dumb, but again, that's my opinion. It's not fact. But I do think it causes a lot of problems cognitively because it doesn't stimulate the brain in the right way, and it actually causes a detriment to growth of education and understanding. When you're living in a fantasy world that has nothing to do with reality or education. Yes, sir.
It could throw off your routine as well.
It does significantly because anything that you're escaping life from always ends up problematic. Correct? That's why I said behaviors, alcohol, and drugs. So yes, you're absolutely right. And a lot of people know that. Internet, escapisms, all the same thing. Food, addiction, gambling, sex, video games, all that stuff is behavioral. And it's just as debilitating as alcohol or drugs, guaranteed. So, all right, what's the last one? How about spirituality? We did emotional, we did cognitive, physical, and with social. Social is any interaction that you engage in without the use of mind-altering substances that pervades some, productive activity. Even if it's just sitting around and talking or so on, or going to the park or going to a sporting event and so on, that's all social. But social interaction should be productive. I mean, you want to, if you're screaming at a concert and so on, are you really socially interacting? Yeah, you're around a bunch of people, but are you socially interacting? No. You want to be able to have dialogue. You want to be able to talk. You want to be able to convey ideas and engage in something that's fun and productive in some way. Productive meaning that you're enjoying your time with the other person. Okay? So, and then the final one is spirituality. A lot of people have trouble with that. We mentioned it earlier. Spirituality could be as simple as meditation. Getting in touch with yourself, your inner, and understanding, that there's, exactly, higher power, however it may be. Some people call it God, some people call it nature, some people, who cares what you call it? It doesn't matter. What it is you gaining some strength, some solace, some comfort, some hope, some strength through the belief of something greater than yourself or a process greater than yourself. I love nature. I'm very in touch with nature, and I think when I'm out in that, I feel connected, I feel part of, I feel comforted in, and I feel strength in. People get that through yoga, meditation, church. Some people get it through reading scripture. Some people, it doesn't matter how you get it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So some people say, I'm not religious. You don't have to be. And everybody's spiritual. Well, I'm not spiritual. Do you believe in that how did the world begin? How did Earth? How did eventually you're going to get back to, I don't know. And as soon as you answer that question, guess what? You're spiritual now. Because you can't explain how everything started. And if you can't, that means you have to believe in something greater than yourself that started something. Well, welcome aboard. Now you're spiritual. It has nothing to do with religion, though. Okay? All right, everybody got that? All right, so those are the basics. Now I'm going to get to a couple other questions. And some of these may hit close to home for you. Some of you are not going to like the answers I give. I can tell you I'm not politically correct. I am correct, but not politically correct. When I say I'm correct, it's because I'm stating medical fact, matter of fact. I won't give you my opinion. If I do, I'll say, I don't know if that's right. It's just my opinion. But otherwise, I'm just telling you what is. All right? And then you do with it what you need to do. In terms of this test, I want you guys to know the difference between something you need and something you want. What is the difference between something you need and something you want?
When you can live without
One you could live without, and one you can't. I agree. So the difference between something you need is death. If I need something and I don't get it, what will happen to me?
You die.
You'll die. What percentage of the time?
100.
100. Yeah, that's it. If you need something and you don't get it, you're done. What if I want something? What if I want my Ferrari and I don't get it? I may act like I'm going to die. I may scream and yell and so on, but I'm not going to die. Does that make sense? So that's the difference between you need and you want. Now, why do we differentiate the two? Because a lot of times people think they're the same, but they are not. Do alcoholics and addicts, behavioral addicts, food, sex, internet, etc., do they think they need it? They absolutely think they need it. They don't think they have control. They think they physically need it. Do they?
No.
They do not. They do not. So if I believe that I need it and that I'll die without it, what is the likelihood I'll stop? Yeah, not so good. It justifies it in that delusional cycle. So we have to differentiate and be responsible with our language. Okay? So what does internal mean? I operationally, remember, these are operationally defined for psychology and behavioral medicine. What is internal? If I say, hey, what's going on inside?
Thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
Yeah, your inside stuff, your thoughts. I don't mean your lungs and your blood and your heart. I mean, when I say what's going on inside, I'm asking about what you think, how you feel, what your thoughts are, your emotions. So thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Those are the only three things that go up there in the noodle. That's it. Now, what about external? If the internal stuff is your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, what do you think I mean by external?
Actions and behaviors.
Actions and behaviors, the things you do. Is one directly related to the other? Meaning one has to occur with the other? If I have a thought, feeling, and emotion, must I act on it?
No.
Not always.
No, not always. So understand the difference. Just because you feel and think, you're going to want to act, but you don't have to. If you don't have impulse control and you're an addict and you feel depressed, what are you going to want to do? Drink or use. Do you have to? No. Are you going to think that? No, because you don't have impulse control. So your immediate reaction is going to be to that thought, feeling, and emotion. That's important to understand because addiction occurs in the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, the midbrain, the ventral tegmental area in the brain. And it's predicated upon a neural network of what we call the dopamine nucleus accumbent pathways. You guys don't need to know all this stuff. It's written in your little pamphlets, and I drew it out real nice and explained it and stuff. But that's the system in your brain, in your system, in your parasympathetic, your automatic system, that controls addiction. So when people think willpower will stop addiction, that's a horrible, ignorant statement. Because no amount of willpower is going to stop you from eating. Because that's a parasympathetic nervous system. When the body needs food, what will it do? When you get hungry enough and you start to starve after about day 3, you'll kill somebody to eat. Literally. It forgoes the thought process and goes right to the instinctual response of, I need to get this. Does that make sense? Try stopping somebody's airway. Don't do that. But I mean, what will happen? You think they're just going to go, no, I'll be okay. They're going to fight. They'll kill you to get that breath. So when the body feels that it's in a fight or flight system or a deadly system, it will instinctively react and circumvent any, I'm a pacifist. I'm not going to, that goes right out the window. And you'll do whatever you need to do to survive. Does that make sense? So the parasympathetic nervous system is where addiction resides. And when you have that urge, cognitively, don't you know that alcohol and you are bad? Yeah, because you've had millions of consequences. So wouldn't that predicate that once you realize that you are going to have consequences from drinking, you wouldn't do it? You would think so, but not when you start to have urges, because what happens? It circumvents the thought process or the prefrontal cortex, which is cognitive, and goes to the parasympathetic, which is the autonomic nervous system, and guess what happens? You don't think about the consequences at the time. You just do it because that's your default. Does that make sense? And anything you do habitually over and over and over will then bypass the thought process and go right to the parasympathetic nervous system as a natural default reaction to a thought and feeling. Does that make sense? Remember, reaction is different than being proactive or to thinking or to be cognitive. All right? So that's why addiction's so hard to treat. I never try to cure addiction. I think addiction's awesome. Here's why. I think it's awesome because it's the perfect weapon. It never runs out. It never ceases. It's always consistent. It never fails. So addiction, you're not going to beat. And I don't try to beat addiction with patients. What I try to do is change what they're addicted to. Does that make sense? Because the only problem with addiction is what you're addicted to. Let's say that you have habituations to healthy lifestyle and proper nutrition and good interactions and so on. Then do we call that addiction? No, we call it wellness. Now, when I'm addicted to something that's harmful to me, then it's a problem, correct? Does the brain care what it's addicted to? It doesn't. What it wants is dopamine. That's all it wants. Everything's broken down into that basic chemical in the brain of dopamine. Does the brain know the difference between dopamine from a healthy behavior and dopamine from an unhealthy behavior? No, and it doesn't give a shit. It just wants dopamine. So if you switch where you're getting the dopamine from with a new, better behavior that doesn't have consequences other than the awkwardness and the change which the brain hates, which you can overcome in 3 or 4 weeks through repetition. Once you do that, then your new default for dopamine will be healthy rather than unhealthy. Does that make sense? And that's how you would beat the physical addiction. And then the psychological part is next. That's 95% of addiction is psychological. That's unresolved issues, family dynamics, abuses, neglects, entitlements, again, unresolved issues. Those are the things that you don't like to think about or talk about. They reside and they create hurt and pain and suffering and shame and guilt and abandonment issues and insecurity. And when you bottle that up and carry it around, it turns into a big toxic mess. And that toxic mess is the fuel for dysfunction. Because if you got rid of all that stuff, would you be dysfunctional? The answer is no. So that is what causes the dysfunction. Okay? So in order to purge that, you got to learn this process. And the process is called therapy. And it's not the type of therapy you guys have been led to believe, where if somebody talks to you in a room and you say, tell me about your childhood, and then all of a sudden you're better. That's not therapy. That's what we call aftercare, and that's just talk therapy. That's more for support. Therapy happens in groups. It happens into a treatment process. It happens over time in a place like this. Detox and residential, that is not treatment. That is physical stabilization. If I'm not physically stable, am I going to respond to treatment? Am I going to want to look at my inner this and talk about family dynamics and where everything? No, I'm just physically trying to stabilize to the point where I'm not throwing up and being sick and I can concentrate for longer than 30 seconds. So that's not treatment at all. That's physical stabilization. And they start you in the routine of a treatment process. Hey, this is a group. This is what you have to talk. They give you some of the basics. So I'm not saying it's not good, but a lot of people go through detox and then they're done, or they go through a rehab with detox and then they think, oh, I'm better. They haven't even started treatment yet. Treatment comes in aftercare and outpatient. So you got detox, residential treatment, usually a minimum of 40 to 60 days, and then you start the treatment part, the actual therapy, and you would start into a small group setting for addiction. You don't do individual. Individual is useless for addiction, not useless, but close to it, for addiction. Because one, there's too much transference between the patient and the therapist. Second of all, that patient's gonna lie and all kinds of bad things are gonna happen in terms of not being accountable. Plus, in individual therapy, how many therapists drug screen their patients? probably 1%. So that's not going to hold them accountable. And if I'm using while I'm in treatment, what's the purpose of treatment? It literally negates any process that you would have of getting better if you're still using Y. And most of the treatment facilities don't even test for drugs
Yeah.
or alcohol use.
That's true.
Or it's random, or they tell you, or whatever. It's useless. So most of the treatment processes out there are antiquated, outdated, 12-step model, which is just slightly above useless, and they're not effective. They have no efficacy to them. So accountability, responsibility is key, because that person won't make changes if they're not accountable, and if they're and how are you going to get consequences if you're not accountable? What happens when laws are not enforced? Does crime go up or down? Take a look around, not here, but in places where it's run by different people than what we have here, and they take away the consequences of law and say, well, we're not gonna prosecute you. You don't have to pay bail or any money, and you can steal this amount. We're just not going to do anything. Well, do you know why I don't rob the bank on the way home every day? Unless it's on a Sunday and they're not open. Because I know I'm going to get a bullet in me, and that's going to hurt, and I'm probably going to die. And if I don't die, I'm going to sit in prison for 20 years. So that's going to prevent me from doing it. But if I went in there one time and the guy's like, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. And I went in there and took out a big stack of money, and I came back here and said, look, you guys would be like, holy shit, where'd you get that? I'm not telling you. What are we all doing tomorrow?
Robbing them.
Yeah, I'm going to have everybody bring a bag, and that's what we're going to do until that bank is out of money.
Can we do that next week?
Yeah, you go first, and then you let me know how that turns out. If you make it out alive and get the money back here, I'll go next. But yeah, that's no, you go first. So that's the problem, guys. Is without consequence, there can't be change. And I this is also on the test. What is the universal motivator for all change? Pain, suffering, and loss. I know people don't like, oh my God. Rock bottom is death. Literally death. But people have different bottoms. But real rock bottom means you death. So you don't want to hit rock bottom, obviously. So the only people that have hit rock bottom are either dead or they're sitting up here telling you how to not die. Those are the people that have gotten close to rock bottom or hit rock bottom.
Wait, can you repeat that?
The only people that truly get close or hit rock bottom, the people that actually hit rock bottom are dead. The people that come real close to hitting rock bottom are teaching you how to be better.
No, what was it before that? It was like pain. And...
Oh, the universal motivator for all change.
Okay, universal.
There is one universal. It is the universal motivator for all change, guaranteed, is pain, suffering, and loss. If you reach enough, hey, listen, you guys, I can tell you right now, I can cure addiction in all people in a short period of time. The problem is they would put me in prison. But I could do it. I could. Let's say I had a facility, a very large facility, and trust me, I've thought about this, but they're not going to let me get away with this. This is Joseph Mengele stuff. I would hook you up to electrical sensors and what have you that could emit a lot of electrical impulses and pain. And every time as you were interacting in the world, I would set up a process of you bettering for physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, and social, and make a great environment for you to live in temporarily, only for about 6 months. And every time you thought about using, I would give you a certain amount of pain through those well-placed electrodes. And I guarantee that would be an unbelievably uncomfortable experience.
Is that like shock therapy?
Well, it's not shock therapy.
No.
That's different.
Okay.
ECT is totally different. This would be a form of a great deal of pain for every time you thought about using. Now, that would be short-lived because that wouldn't go very long. But every time you thought and you said something that was anti-drug use and proactive coping, you'd get a reward. You'd get you'd get acknowledgement, you would get emotional reward, you may even become monetarily rewarded, and all that other stuff. And on the other while, every once in a while, when you decided, hey, or you started to talk, bam. So not only would I have you fully aware of your thoughts, the negative thoughts, and fully aware of your positive thoughts, and change those really quickly within a week, easily. What would happen is, because now you're engaged in a lifestyle where I'm teaching you exercise daily and how to be productive, how to exercise your mind, how to cope the right way, and I'm modeling that behavior. And in the meanwhile, every time you have a bad thought or a bad behavior, you're getting jolted and having immediate consequence. And then immediate reward when you do the right thing. How long would it take for someone to be conditioned into wellness? Not very long. I would say 6 to 8 weeks, and you'd be right as rain. You would have a 90% chance of becoming better long term. And if I kept it up longer, you'd have an even better chance, but you probably shouldn't need that. And most people would learn even quicker. I'm just saying the worst case scenarios. These are people that are junkies and so on that have no real hope of getting better. Now, people without that severity, I would imagine real quick, all I have to do is make a couple consequences that are immediate, and I guarantee you, let's say I had the ability to, every time that you got drunk, put you immediately in jail for 5 to 7 days, or take away your children, or take away your livelihood, let you live outside for a little bit on the street, starve. Guess how many people would continue to do that? 0. So I'm talking about the worst of the worst that have been habituated and junkies for 20, 30 years that have no hope of survival. Now, the other folks that are just in the habituation stage, just new to addiction, that could be easily treated. Is that legal? No. They wouldn't like that. Would it be effective? 100%. I'm sure there's outliers and there's extraneous variables and everything, but guarantee you that would be unbelievably effective. Immediate consequence. Imagine this. And the reason I say all that before is, for one, to make a point, because it's fun and we can laugh about it a little bit. 2, you'll remember it. 3 is, there's some truth to it. The truth is this. When I first got exposed to alcohol and I over-excessed, I got caught and had horrible consequences, what are the chances I would do it again? And they'd be cut in half. Let's say I did do it again, and I got caught again and had horrible consequences, even worse than the time before. What are the chances I would do it again? Well, now we're starting to get minuscule. Let's say I did try it a third time just for the hell of it. And I got caught. And I got even worse consequences. Now what are the chances? Probably 0. At that point, you're just like, forget it. At some point, the brain's like, this is not going to work. Does that make sense? Because of the immediate consequence of it, I never would have formed into a habitual pattern of dysfunction, which led to habituation, which led to chemical changes, which led to practice after practice, which led to the parasympathetic, which then led to addiction. It takes years and years and years of practice in order to become addicted and habituated. Years and years and years of practice, thousands and thousands of times. And the problem is, what are the chances of you having severe consequences the first 500 times? Slim and none. Slim and none. You went 10, 15 years, 20 years with no consequences and only pleasure. So, of course, you're going to be resistant. Of course, you're going to have that mindset. You've been habituated to it, and you haven't had any consequences. And what did I say? What happens without consequences? Aberrance. And continued aberrance gets worse and worse. It's progressive. Does that make sense? Consequence is what we need in order to delay gratification and impulse control. That is the only reason people become addicted. There's no other reason. Impulse control and delayed gratification. That is a learned response, usually around age 2 to age 4. And that's the impulse control. You're born with no impulse control. It has to be learned. Having no impulse control as a child keeps you alive. That's good. So it's an anthropological evolution that keeps you well. Delayed gratification comes in the terrible twos when that kid wants to put everything in his mouth and he's going to be doing all this and saying no and blah, blah, blah. So that kid needs to learn the word no. He needs structure, routine, and consistency. He needs discipline. He needs to know there's rules and there's consequences and rewards for following the rules or not. And when you do that enough, what happens to his impulse control? It gets manageable and under control and then compliant. And then he learns the right way to get something through sacrifice and hard work and compliance. And when you do that, you get it. And once that starts to happen over years, he's a normal human being. If you never develop impulse control or delayed gratification because you've been not parented to, or you've been overindulged and entitled and spoiled and not disciplined, then you didn't develop impulse control or delayed gratification. You've been entitled to think that you're better than what you are. You've been told how awesome you are for doing nothing more than converting oxygen into carbon dioxide. And you're living in chaos because there is no structure, routine, or consistency. They just let you do whatever. So what is that going to do to a child's mind? Do kids like living in chaos? They start to because they can get away with everything, but is it good for them? No. Because then they're inattentive. They're hyperactive. They're unable to sit still and to focus. Why? Because they're living in chaos, because they have no impulse control. There's no structure, routine. There's no discipline. So they don't know how to succeed, and that creates anxiety. And children with anxiety and chaos have all kinds of inattentiveness, hyperactivity, all kinds of stuff. Sound familiar? ADHD isn't a disease, unless the parents are the disease. It's inadequate, inconsistent, faulty parenting. Meaning that they didn't create structure, routine, and discipline consistently. And when that happens, that's what the byproduct of children is. You know what the cure is? Routine, structure, and discipline. That's what the cure is. Plain and simple. So that's what happens when you have to make corrections for that type of disorder. So when a child is put into structured routine and consistency, guess what will miraculously happen? He'll get better. Yeah, they'll get better. Because they'll learn to calm themselves. They'll learn to delay gratification and impulse control. That will settle them down because they have routine and structure. They'll learn how to be successful by living within boundaries. And then that structure and routine will create stability. And that stability will help them learn and to focus and so on. And then pretty soon they'll catch up with everybody else. And when they learn how to be successful by doing things the right way, they catch right up. Attention deficit hyperactivity, untreated, what percentage by high school is gone? 80-90% of ADHD cases in children disappear with no treatment by the age of high school. What have they learned during that time? Consequence and suffering and pain.
Yeah.
And when you get enough of that, guess what you'll do? You'll stop. So again, will putting somebody on cocaine or methamphetamine, does that help? Adderall is methamphetamine and Ritalin is cocaine. Molecularly changed slightly, but almost identical in the brain processing. Is that good for a child, a developing brain? Would you give your kid methamphetamine at age 14? Well, yeah, then you shouldn't do that. So those things that they call medications, they're not. They're drugs. Medications cure, fix. And that doesn't cure or fix that kid. It will cause them a high probability of becoming an addict, because of course you're going to become addicted to that. And of course it has severe consequences to a developing brain. That's medical fact. So how's that going to help? It doesn't. It destroys that kid's life. For what? Because it was too inconvenient for you to be a parent and create structure and routine and consistency and take the time and effort to help that kid develop? How sad. Same with Ritalin, no different. So again, just medical fact. Just FYI in case you wanted the truth. Now, is that profitable? No. Being good parents and being consistent, what's the number one precursor for all dysfunction? Single family home, plain and simple. Man or woman, doesn't matter. Single family home. You have probably an 80 to 90% likelihood of developmental delays, dropping out of school, jail, drug addiction, if you come from a single family home. Sorry, statistically that hasn't changed in the last 80 years, 90 years, since it's been studied all the time. Now, why is that? Because kids need love, attention, belonging, and safety and security, which means discipline, structure, and routine. And when those are overindulged or not, too much of or not enough of, that will create those imbalances, and then that child will have all kinds of issues. We're going to get into that later, so I don't want to get too far into that. But know that all dysfunction comes from too much of or not enough of love, attention, sense of belonging, and safety and security, which is routine, structure, and discipline. That's what safety and security is. Okay? We'll get into that. That's the second half. Okay? All right. Any questions about anything that we covered so far? These are just some fundamentals and so on and so forth. They'll be practically applied later. But for now, I just want you to get the basics. Okay? All right. Any questions? Everybody knows who to get with and all that other stuff. Sorry, guys, about the